Oh, hello. My name is Mark Ritson. How are you? Oracle have asked me to talk about artificial intelligence. And what I want to talk about in my session is artificial intelligence. The future of marketing is now. That's not really what I'm going to talk about. And all credit to Oracle picking me to talk about this topic, because they must know, I would imagine, that I'm not the world's biggest fan of artificial intelligence. I'm not against it, but I think there's an enormous amount of BS that's spouted about artificial intelligence. And also, to Oracle's credit, they've let me build whatever deck I want about this topic. And so I'm not going to talk about artificial intelligence, the future of marketing. Instead, I'm going to talk about something a little bit more basic. I'm going to talk about putting genuine intelligence back into marketing, one IQ point at a time. I don't want to avoid the artificial intelligence issue. I'll include it, but I'd like to broaden things out a little bit, if that's okay with you. So let's start at the beginning. What do we really mean by intelligence? Let's consult the dictionary. We really mean two very different things. If you look first of all at definition 2, intelligence means the collection of information, the actual stuff itself that we gather. And then if you move up to item 1, it's the ability to acquire and apply, keyword, apply that knowledge to a situation. So when we speak of marketing intelligence and intelligence in marketing, we really mean two linked things: gathering insight, information, and data, and then being able to make sense of it and apply it to our strategic advantage. So here's what I've learned about those two conjoined challenges on my journeys through marketing. 6 or 7 lessons that I think are each equally important. The first one is that intelligence is actually not the first step in the marketing journey. The first step in the marketing journey is actually the concept of market orientation. It's one of our most foundational concepts. We've been studying it in marketing for around about 35 years, and yet so many marketers have no clue what it means, and it has massive implications for them and everyone else. So what do we mean by market orientation? We mean the prime directive of marketing, which is the ability of an organization or a manager or marketer to see the world the way the customer sees it, which is our main function in marketing. One way to think about that is, there's a tendency for marketing to always be about us talking about that consumer out there. When we talk about market orientation, what we're saying is, let's not start with lots of discussions about a hypothetical customer. Yeah. Instead, let's do a 180. And let's actually look at how that individual sees us, looks at us, our product, our service, our company, because that's what market orientation means. And there's a few snags to that apparently very simple swivel. It turns out that you, with the greatest respect and love, while you're an expert, I'm sure, in the product and company you work for, you're actually an idiot of consumption. You're the least qualified person in the world to think about your product or service like a customer, because you're not. You don't have to pay for it, right? And when you look at your product, whatever it is, you see your work, your career, your salary, your pension, your future. You just don't see photocopiers or software or training or paper clips. Yeah, you are literally the idiot of consumption. And if you can embrace that through what I often call the humility of marketing, and grasp the idea that how you see it is not how the customer sees it, you're in a good place to be a good marketer. So many marketers, unfortunately, never get that concept. They think they can really see it from their gut upwards. Another way, perhaps, to conceptualize this is when you signed your contract to join the company you joined a very good organization. But what HR didn't tell you is you left something behind. And what you left behind is the world of the consumer. You'll never see it the way the consumer sees it. And so you have to do what all good marketers do, which is let it go. Yeah? Understand you're not the consumer and let it go. And that's crucial when we talk about intelligence, because when it gets to marketing intelligence, it's not your ability to answer questions. Is this website good? Is this price right? Does the product work? The answer to all those questions, if you are market oriented, is the same, which is, I don't know, I'm not the consumer, but as a marketer, I can sure as hell find out. So therein lies the trick. First of all, before we even get to gathering data, is having the market orientation to be able to understand how to handle it when it comes in. I often think of market orientation very much as digging a hole, and then we fill it with data. But if you haven't dug the hole, then there's a problem. So market orientation first, then comes the intelligence bit. And even before we get to that intelligence bit, there's another point I would raise before we start pumping lots of data into the company. If you look at this concept of market orientation, which again, we've been studying and measuring in various different ways for decades, it's very intriguing what market orientation actually looks like. There are many different scales and models that have been built to measure how market oriented is an organization. My personal favorite is the Morton scale, which was developed by Rohit Deshpande and John Morton, who are among the most famous marketers on the planet, marketing professors. And their scale is remarkably simple, right? The scale looks essentially at 10 questions that we ask employees. And what we get from that is a gauge of the degree of market orientation within the company. Now, there's lots of questions. And by the way, this isn't one of those very basic, pop questionnaires. This is a scale that's been tested, by Farley and Deshpande across many different markets and industries. Anyway, it looks at many different items, 10 different items, some of which make more sense. For example, the first one there, the organizational objectives of this service provider are primarily driven by customer satisfaction. It makes sense that that would be one of the 10 questions that drives whether or not a company is truly market oriented or not. But there's a couple here that might surprise you. For example, there's one here that says the company freely communicates information about its successful customer experiences across all departments. There's another that says data on customer satisfaction are disseminated at all levels in this company on a regular basis. Those two questions are interesting because what they tell you is market orientation isn't just about having oceans of big data sloshing around an organization. Before we have that, we have to have the systems in place to spread that information in the optimal way. And I often think of that as irrigation. And what I mean by irrigation is, we dig the channels in a field before we pump the water in. And in the same way, in a good organization, a CMO, a senior marketer, ensures that the systems are in place to share the data before we begin to bring the data in. So, again, intelligence is as much about the channels that carry it around the organization as it is the intelligence itself. And then we get to the intelligence and what makes up that actual source of information. I think there's a huge bias, especially with a lot of technical companies, to believe that essentially intelligence is quantitative. It's big data. It's analytical. And there's kind of a cliche which plays out. And we could use the recent Elton John biopic, Rocket Man, to illustrate it, where qualitative data is the flamboyant, creative, slightly indulgent sources of information that, frankly, they look impressive, but they're not. Whereas in this case, Elton John's manager is more serious and useful and applied and businesslike. And I just don't think that's actually fair. And in fact, I would argue not only is marketing intelligence at least half qualitative, it is first and foremost qualitative before the quantitative data kicks in. Let me explain. And let me explain with a silly but hopefully useful example. I'm now going to propose two different alternative ways that I'll run the rest of our presentation, okay? In alternative N, resten av presentationen är på svenska. Jag pratar på dålig svenska. De närmaste 10 minuter, bara min text och leverans. I'm going to do it all in Swedish, basically, okay? The rest of the presentation, all my examples, all my speaking, all my slides will be in svenska. I speak really bad Swedish, but I'll give it a go. That's option one. Option two is I'll do the thing in English, and my slides will be in English, but I'm going to invert all the slides upside down for the rest of this session, okay? And there are your two options. You've got option A, which is jag vill prata en svenska, or option B, I'll do it upside down, all right? So take a moment and think which one you'd vote for, A or B. I think almost all of you, probably more than 90%, will go for option B. Other than a small proportion up in Scandinavia, everyone else is going to go, give me B, yeah? And that makes perfect sense. So I kick off the rest of my session with my slides completely inverted. And at some point, someone from Oracle quite correctly steps in and says, Mark, that's not appropriate. Your slides are upside down. And I say to the people from Oracle, chill out. I asked the whole of the marketing audience what they wanted, and almost 90%, a massive majority, requested that my slides now become inverted. I'm just giving the market what they want. Now, of course, this is a stupid example. I only gave you two options, and neither of them were particularly palatable. But that's what happens when you present a limited suite of options or variables and then measure the outcomes. Yeah, and this is a real problem. If you don't understand the qualities, the what, before you measure the amounts, the quantities are meaningless, as you see with my example. And it really is an issue. I spent about 4 or 5 years training McKinsey consultants, and McKinsey consultants love a conjoint. A conjoint or trade-off analysis, as many of you will know, is a brilliant method for assessing price and working out which attributes are most important. And on several occasions, they would share with me their best, most recent conjoint for a client. And sure enough, they'd measured 4 or 5 different things and how important they were. And I'd say to the client, oh, sorry, my slides are upside down. I promised. There we go. And I'd say to my McKinsey team, where did these options actually come from? Where did you get them from? And they said, well, it's pretty obvious. There's 4 or 5 things. And look at the measures and look what it's revealed. And of course, it was very easy to then say to them, yeah, but you've measured A, B, and C. But what if variables D, E, and F that you've missed out here are actually more important? They wouldn't show up on the conjoint. So you get the point. The lesson of marketing intelligence isn't just that you want qual and quant. You want qual first to work out what the options are, how they look, and then we can progress. Yeah. So intelligence is qualitative first. And if I can be even more prescriptive, in my journeys using research, I would tell you that not only should it be qualitative, the more qualitative, the better. And the ultimate source of qualitative intelligence is ethnography. Ethno, people, graphy, describe. It's a rather fancy word for a very simple approach. And the approach is get your ass out of the office, out of the research facility. Because if the purpose of research is for you to understand your customers, why are you bringing them to you into focus groups, into surveys? Why don't you go out to them and experience their world and become intelligent by seeing what they're going through? That was certainly the principle of one of the most famous corporate ethnographic groups of all time, Park. Park were the research outfit for Xerox, and were a legendary team of researchers who understood the power of qualitative first. This rather grainy photograph you see here is from a very famous case study in which the Park team set about trying to improve photocopiers. And that woman that you can't even see because the quality of the image is so bad, behind those two gentlemen struggling with the photocopier, is Lucy Suchman, one of the most famous corporate ethnographers of all time. So Suchman is actually hunched down in that corner under the coat hanger. And she did that for hundreds of hours, just watching and then talking to people trying to use photocopiers. And from that insight, that most qualitative intelligence, they were able to build better, more superior, more intuitive photocopiers. That's the power of qualitative research, particularly ethnography, intelligence that is inductive and comes from the source itself. Now, before we get too into the qualitative moment, let's be clear. There is a real problem with qualitative data. No matter how many days Lucy sits watching people use photocopiers or how many focus groups we do, the problem of qualitative research is it cannot be representative. Yeah? In order to get representative data, we need quant. And representation is important because if I can say these 100 people are representative of these 50 million people, I can now imply causality. I can explain things. I can then experiment and see what moves things more or less with magnitudes. I can test, I can prove. Qual helps me understand the problem and articulate the issues. Quant allows me to measure it with magnitudes. And so when it comes to marketing intelligence, as many marketing professors would tell you, we've always got the challenge of people who are chemists and violinists. Some of us intuitively prefer quantitative data. We're chemists by nature. Others, more intuitively, are perhaps violinists. We move towards more qualitative data. And the reality is, to be intelligent, to master intelligence in marketing, one must become a king or queen of both. And that means working on your weaker hand when it comes to research. And perhaps as we travel through the 21st century, we should add to the chemist and the violinist metaphor a third option, which is the supercomputer. Chemists, violinists, and machines. Because it is indeed time to accept that intelligence is also, within its limitations, also artificial. The opportunity that big data now presents to us is overstated at conferences, but by goodness, over time, it will surely come to fruition. The ability to understand analytical patterns is very exciting for marketers. And in particular, the idea that we can let the machine go fishing for patterns and insights and learnings, and then to test those learnings and to improve and alter things in real time, opens a doorway to intelligence that's never been present before. The closest we've ever got, I would argue, is probably retailers. If you look at the last 30 years, retailers have become all-powerful, and it wasn't always the case. Why have retailers become the powerful part of the marketing equation? Well, partly it's because they have immediate access to big data. Through store cards and the ability to experiment in store, retailers have been at the front edge of big data. And as they've tested and learned and evolved, they've become far smarter and more intelligent than the manufacturers that supply them. Now multiply that by a billion times, and the power of artificial intelligence becomes apparent in driving marketing intelligence. But even once we've collected all that quantitative data, I'd also still recommend that you observe the fact that intelligence works best backwards. The hell do I mean by that? Well, this handsome fellow here is Alan Iverson. Iverson's one of the most famous marketing professors of all time. He's a delightful fellow, even though his photograph occasionally makes him look a little bit sinister. And Iverson has written a whole bunch of amazing works on marketing, but my favorite is one of his most simple. About 20 odd years ago, he wrote a paper called Backward Market Research, which changed my life and made me more intelligent. And I want it to make you more intelligent too. So what on earth is backward market research? Let me explain. Well, take yourself back to an experience I've had many times, and I'm sure you've had too. You're in a room inside your office with 4 or 5 colleagues. You're looking at some marketing intelligence, a quantitative survey that's been collected, and you're progressing through the slide deck of charts and data points and tables. And each time you come to a different slide, you look around the room and everyone thinks to themselves, well, what does this chart say? What does it tell us? Well, what it should be telling you is you're all a bit shit at this. And what I mean by that is you're doing it wrong. I mean, I'm as guilty of this as you are. but you're doing it wrong. And Iverson's backward market research is a fix for that process. Let me explain. So what normally happens in those suboptimal situations is we design a questionnaire, right? Often with hundreds of questions, yeah? We stuff it all in there. We then execute the questionnaire and it generates a shit ton of data. At that point, as we've just seen, we sit in a room and we try and work out, what does this data say? And we normally take a very tiny proportion of those slides and those data points and we build a presentation, which we then present at an annual meeting or a planning session or a review session. Yeah, this is the suboptimal story of most marketing intelligence. What Alan Iverson proposes is we completely change that sequence. We almost turn it on its head. He proposes we do things backwards instead. So first, we begin at the beginning by thinking about, what are we doing this research for? We imagine the talk, the meeting, the planning session, the report we have to build or create, and we start at the end. We then design the presentation. Now, this seems odd, but I've done this many, many times, and it works. I actually build a PowerPoint deck with titles and instructions for what will be in the slide, describing a table or a chart. The chart just doesn't exist yet, nor does the data to populate it. But this is the table that shows me X correlated with Y. And this is the title and the order it goes in. Having built that presentation, I then work out all the data I need to populate it. That then enables me backwards to build the questionnaire. Not questionnaire creating data, but here's the data I need. Now build a much tighter, cleaner, cheaper, faster questionnaire to generate the data that I need. And finally, I don't need to analyze it anymore because I've already got my sequence. I give the presentation or report that I'd already planned to give. Trust me, this process makes you look more intelligent, but also it speeds things up, it cuts back cost, it makes the process better. I'd also point out that intelligence on its own is weak unless we add the time variable. And intelligence multiplied by time should lead to evolution. I've seen it now throughout my career. I've worked for senior marketers all over the world, and a small proportion have a special skill. And that skill is they do what all the other marketers do, but with a twist. So they build a plan, like most marketers do. They execute the plan, again, like most marketers. They then review the plan. Not all marketers do that. They're quick to build a new plan. Good marketers review the plan in quite a lot of detail before they move on. And they do that because they want to learn. I know that sounds obvious, but most companies from year to year don't learn anything. They carry on as if what's just happened can't help them understand the future. The good marketers, the one that have risen to the top and been more successful, at least in my experience, take time to learn from successes and failures. And then they improve on the basis of that learning. And then, of course, with that learning and improvement achieved, they go back and plan again, but they plan better. Intelligence leads to evolution. It's an ongoing challenge. Yeah? Learning never ends. And marketing intelligence feeds that never-ending process in the best marketers. So, my argument to you is intelligence is actually several different things. Yeah. First of all, it's not the first step. It doesn't begin with intelligence. We must begin with market orientation and creating room and understanding of the role that intelligence plays. Linked to that, we've also got to create the irrigation in our organization so our intelligence can be spread around the organization, because marketing is too important just for the marketing department. Remember that intelligence is qual first, is understanding the problem in an inductive way, and then it's quant second, measuring it with elegance and magnitude. Remember that there is now an important role for artificial intelligence, but don't overstate it. It exists within the parameters of general marketing intelligence. And remember that of all the great lessons of market research, the best, I fear, is the one that Alan Iverson teaches us. And designing research, especially the quantitative stage, back to front, can be very, very powerful. And finally, remember that intelligence is evolutionary. It should lead to you becoming better, smarter, more intelligent. Intelligence, therefore, isn't one thing. It's multidimensional, if you're smart enough to realize it. Thank you.